Now, I want you all to cast your minds back to 2015, a time where The Walking Dead was 5 seasons in with a growing audience, and they had just successfully released the first 6 episodes of their very first spin-off, titled Fear the Walking Dead. It was a time the media franchise could seemingly do no wrong, and they looked poised to dominate our TV screens for decades to come. But fast forward just 10 years, and this once juggernaut has now just received its lowest viewership to date, as Dead City Season 2 pulled in just 278,000 viewers, a far cry from the 15 million viewers a week it pulled in its heyday. So how did we get to this point? Well, that's exactly what we're going to find out today. I'm going to be delving into every decision AMC made and going through their biggest mistakes, trying to fix them, as we explore what actually went wrong for the Walking Dead universe, and more importantly, how do we fix it? The early era of The Walking Dead is some of the most phenomenal television ever made. Airing on Halloween night in 2010, this rather unassuming TV show quickly started to gain some traction, and in many ways was the catalyst for zombie mania throughout the 2010s. The show followed a former police sheriff named Rick Grimes traversing the unforgiving landscape of the apocalypse, and although classed as a horror show, it did so much more than just provide some cheap jump scares. The show offered us a gritty and gut-wrenching insight into human survival, and at its core, The Walking Dead was never really about the zombies, it was about the people. The pilot episode, titled Days Gone By, pulled in a colossal 5.35 million live viewers, but as I mentioned earlier, this would only continue to rise throughout the years, eventually reaching 15 million viewers per episode in season 5 of the show. Now look, AMC had obviously smashed it out the park with The Walking Dead. However, beneath all the success, cracks were starting to form. Seasons 1 to 4 were pretty much perfect. Yes, albeit there are some minor nitpicks I could say, like how insufferable the writers made Andrea, and of course the episode TS19, where they probably revealed a little bit too much too soon about the virus, but these decisions were nowhere near enough to put viewers off watching the show, which is evident by the numbers. The first real crack was early on in season 5. After the biggest storyline to date as our group took on the termites, we get the Grady Memorial story, which was centered around Beth Green and her conflict trying to escape the grasps of former police officer Dawn Lerner. The problem with this arc is it felt like a major detour from the main group's journey. Coming off the explosive escape from Terminus and the emotional loss of Bob and Tyrese, the hospital arc just slowed everything down. On top of this, we get the heartbreaking death of Beth just as she was coming into her own. We never see any of the characters from the hospital ever again, and the one character we did actually gain from this whole ordeal was Noah, a promising and likeable person. However, he too would wind up dead before even the conclusion of that season, ultimately making this whole storyline feel like a massive waste of time. And this was the first time AMC had really missed the mark in The Walking Dead. So with the added addition of hindsight, how do we fix this issue? Well, put very bluntly, the Grady Memorial storyline flat out doesn't need to happen. It doesn't really progress our group in any way, and yes, the mystery of who abducted Beth was cool for a short period of time, it very quickly fizzles out. Now in my opinion, I think this time could have been delegated to another group. For example, the Wolves, a group who were interesting in their philosophy but never really got much time to shine in the actual show. This sadistic group had been built up for over half a season, whether it was spray paint on walls or walkers with W's carved into their foreheads, there was just a real sense of horror in the air around this group. However, once they fully appeared in season 6, they were quickly dispatched during the attack on Alexandria, and the tension built up from season 5 felt very underwhelming with how fast they were eliminated as a group. And add to this, they never really had a proper central figure to embody their ideology. Yes, I know on paper Owen was the leader, but he was never that compelling as a character. But if you take out the Grady Memorial storyline, that gives them another 5 episodes in the spotlight, and maybe they could encounter like a splinter group of the Wolves in the woods. kind of like when Daryl and Abraham found the Saviors in season 6, and they use this time to give the wolves a proper leader, and maybe recycle the character of Owen, the man we meet in the show who actually leads the group, as the leader of the Splinter group that our survivors have to defeat at the start of season 5. Dedicating these episodes to fleshing out the wolves just that bit more is what AMC should have done, in my opinion. It keeps the story moving, it teases the next conflict, and if the writers were so adamant on killing off Beth and Tyrese, have them die to the wolves. I mean, in the actual show, the wolves kill no one of note, so this would actually add emotional weight to this storyline. But again, even though fans were more vocal around their dissatisfaction with the Grady Memorial storyline, it still didn't really put anybody off the show. In fact, fans regard season 5 of The Walking Dead as one of the best seasons in television history, even with this rather boring arc in it, which really tells you just how good the rest of the season was. But this was just a minor bump in the road for AMC, as later that year The Walking Dead would expand into its very first spin-off. Now, naturally, following the roaring success of the main show, AMC decided to capitalise by releasing its first spin-off titled Fear the Walking Dead. Set in the exact same cinematic universe, Fear was marketed as a show that would explore the fall of civilization and the start of the wildfire virus, something the main show had pretty much glossed over. And the first season of Fear averaged another colossal 11.2 million average viewers. AMC had seemingly hit a never-ending oasis of content. And although season 1 of Fear the Walking Dead was received with slightly lower reviews than the main show, myself and many other fans absolutely loved it. It was a fresh and new perspective on the apocalypse where we watched society fall apart through the eyes of the Clark family. Now, Fear the Walking Dead can be broken into two distinct eras. You have the Dave Erickson era, who would oversee the running of the show for the first 3 seasons, and then you have the Scott Gimple era, but we will get onto that later. Now, to lay this video out more simply, I'm going to just go over the first 3 seasons in this section, and we will come back to Fear the Walking Dead when it catches back up with the main show later on. The first 3 seasons of Fear the Walking Dead were just so special. Now, albeit I might be slightly biased, but this show felt completely different from the main one in the best possible way. And it actually managed to stand out from its parent show, and a huge part of that is due to the characters. AMC once again hit the jackpot when casting for Fear the Walking Dead, as they managed to get Cliff Curtis, who would go on to star in the Avatar films, Frank Delane, who had previously been in Harry Potter and broke out in this role as Nick, Alicia Debenham Carey, who would go on to win Best Female Breakout Star after her role in Season 2 of this very show, and of course Coleman Domingo, who has been nominated in back-to-back years for the Best Actor at the Oscars, along with many more. They absolutely nailed this cast. And as for the viewership over the first 3 seasons, yes, it did see a slight decrease from Season 1, but it still averaged a very respectable 4 million viewers per episode. And the first 3 seasons aren't perfect. There's the shocking writing of Chris and of course the death of Travis Manawa, but it really was superb. We explored Mexico, we saw death through different cultures, we saw how Nick, a recovering drug addict, was able to swap out his addiction to substances and replace it with adrenaline, as he quickly became one of the most intriguing characters in the Walking Dead universe, and of course we saw the dynamic of 3 families just trying to survive in a world of chaos. And by the time season 3 had come to an end, it had carved out a real fan base. Fear was by all means a massive success for AMC. Yes, it wasn't reaching the soaring heights of its parent show in terms of viewership, but then again, its viewership was more than double that of critically acclaimed spin-off Better Call Saul from the Breaking Bad universe, so it also wasn't doing badly. And the reviews, well, they were improving season by season. Fear the Walking Dead had successfully managed to expand the Walking Dead universe. Now surely there's no way AMC was going to mess it up from here, right? Now, late 2015 saw the release of Season 6 of The Walking Dead, and it was once again incredibly well received by fans. Well, apart from a singular episode. The season finale, titled Last Day on Earth, left us with a huge cliffhanger, but more on that in a bit. Season 6 as a whole had been building up to the introduction of the Saviors, and more importantly Negan. Fans were eagerly awaiting for the adaptation of this storyline from the comics, and anticipation was at an all-time high. Now, like I said earlier, the cliffhanger at the end of the season, however, rubbed fans the wrong way. The episode ends with Negan choosing someone from Rick's group to kill, then brutally beating them to death with his bat Lucille. However, the camera cuts to first-person perspective just before revealing who the victim actually was, and this meant viewers only saw the kill from the victim's perspective, and it almost felt like a cheap narrative trick to force you to watch the next season, which of course you'd have to wait for. Now, like I've said in recent videos, this episode has aged incredibly well with the rise of streaming sites, because of course you are just one click away from revealing who Negan actually killed. However, back then, fans were forced to wait 8 whole months. Now, The Walking Dead had a reputation for bold and brutal storytelling, but by turning this death into a marketing gimmick, it felt like a ploy from AMC to prioritise ratings over the narrative integrity of the show. Now, this was the first true mistake AMC had ever made to damage its relationship with its audience long term. The Grady Memorial storyline, Glenn's fake out death, and many more did annoy fans, but this instance would have lasting consequences. And the worst part, AMC wouldn't even feel its effects until later down the line. So, months have passed, it's now 2016, and Season 7 is finally released, and boy does it open up with a bang. The episode The Day Will Come Where You Won't Be is genuinely a masterpiece in tension and horror, and it did stand as the highest rated episode in the whole show until it got review bombed a couple of months later. A whopping 21 million viewers from across the globe tuned in to this season opener, which of course saw the death of Glenn and Abraham. Now, initially, many fans were upset. In fact, some altogether stopped watching the show right then and there due to the brutality of particularly Glenn's death. But dare I say, I think AMC were right, at least with killing Glenn. In my opinion, it's actually killing Abraham that was their bigger mistake here. Now, of course, Glenn had a huge fan base. He was probably the most likeable character on the show, and offered us a beacon of hope in this rather depressing world. And after his death, the whole tone of the show shifted totally. However, not only does he die at the exact same point in the comics, but I also feel his story had come to a natural conclusion. We'd spent 7 years getting to know Glenn, but other than maybe raising his child, he'd gone full circle as a character, and he didn't have that much left to give. And the people who stopped watching the show because of Glenn's death, which I will get onto in a little bit, 9 out of 10 times say they stopped watching the show because Glenn's death was too graphic rather than it was the wrong narrative decision. And his death was actually a catalyst for other characters to progress. Maggie dealt with grief and found strength in her loss to become a leader. Rick saw the cost of unchecked power and began to question his own leadership style. And of course, Daryl carried an immense amount of guilt. The mistake, in my humble opinion, in this episode was actually killing Abraham. Oh, and also having Daryl punch Negan, which caused the second death. Even though I said it further developed Daryl's character, it still should have never happened. Daryl, whilst impulsive, isn't stupid, however this scene paints him out to be and feels incredibly out of character. What I think AMC should have done is just killed Glenn in the lineup scene. Negan still comes out having killed a key member of the group, demonstrating his power and giving us the introduction he deserves, but keeping Abraham alive I think is the correct play here. He'd just started a relationship with Sasha, we'd begun learning about his past, and him falling back in love with life again was a story I don't think we saw enough of. But also having one death means Daryl doesn't get his guilt arc, which starts to feel overdrawn, especially towards the end of Season 7. Now, obviously, you may argue, what about all the people that stopped watching the show due to Glenn's death? However, statistically, the show would only drop 3 million viewers worldwide from the Season 7 opener, which albeit is a lot, but not only do you expect a drop off after a season opener, but this would also statistically mean it was still 1 million viewers more than average from the previous season. So yes, some people may have found Glenn's death too disturbing, but the show had actually grown in viewers from the last season. And to be honest, Glenn's one of my favourite characters in the whole Walking Dead universe, but I still think if you stopped watching the show because they killed him off, then The Walking Dead just flat out isn't the show for you. It's not some fairy tale with a happy ending, it's a bleak realisation of human nature. And the fall off in viewership that would start to occur in the latter half of Season 7 came down to the poor writing decisions rather than Glenn's death. Season 7 started controversially, but arguably the writers then took it incredibly safe, as it turns into a psychological drag. The implementation of fragmented storytelling, although it had been around for the previous few seasons, it really slows the pace to an absolute halt, delaying much of the main plot for Season 7, and it almost seemed like they were trying to reach an episode count rather than tell a cohesive story at points. In fact, we are lucky that Jeffrey Dean Morgan and Andrew Lincoln absolutely kill their roles, especially in Season 7, as if AMC casted wrong here, this season could have been a complete disaster. The general fan didn't mind hardships. I mean, The Walking Dead had always been about survival, but they needed a sense of progression or hope, or even just a bit of forward momentum for our group. However, it just felt like a lot of wallowing from our main survivors. Now, before I move on to Season 8, I'd quickly like to give a shout out, just like I did for Fear, to AMC's casting. Andrew Lincoln, Scott Wilson, Jeffrey Dean Morgan, Lauren Cohan, John Bernthal, Melissa McBride, Stephen Yeun, and so many more do such a special job in giving The Walking Dead its identity. And I think the very foundations of this franchise was casting some of the very best in the business. Look, for AMC's previous mistakes, they are either nitpicks or fairly easy corrections to make in terms of cutting or changing parts of seasons. But in Season 8, that would forever change. AMC would make arguably the biggest mistake in TV history. It would cost AMC over 30% of their viewers, meaning 1 in 3 people stopped watching the show altogether. Now, after a lackluster stretch of episodes towards the end of Season 7, Season 8 opened to an audience of a very respectable 15 million viewers. However, the season would go on to average just 10 million viewers worldwide. But what was this mistake I'm referring to? Well, I'm sure most of you watching by now will know exactly what I'm talking about. And that is, of course, the death of Carl Grimes. Whilst intended as an emotional and narrative turning point for the story, Carl's death ultimately proved to be a catastrophic misstep for AMC. It severed the show's long-term narrative spine, alienated fans, and distributed character arcs that had been carefully developed over years. Killing Carl wasn't just a shock death, it was a decision that caused irreversible damage to the Walking Dead universe, as we will see a little bit later down the line. But in the short term, viewers started to dwindle, ratings started to drop, and AMC's money printing machine started to falter. The Walking Dead, to its very core, was about Rick and Carl, the relationship of father and son being tested in a brutal world. Rick's entire journey was fueled by one thing: protecting Carl and building a better world for him. Carl was Rick's reason to keep going in this world, the anchor that kept him tethered to his humanity, and with Carl gone, Rick's motivations unravelled. Now, no one really knows for sure why AMC, and more importantly Scott Gimple, chose to kill off Carl Grimes. Many speculate it's because his actor, Chandler Riggs, was turning 18 and they didn't want to pay him an adult wage, and others argue it was just a complete blunder. But no matter what reason it comes down to, this moment would change the course of the Walking Dead universe forever. Now, we could talk about this mistake all day. I mean, words don't even do it justice, but I do have a whole video on this very subject on my channel, so I won't go into too much detail here. But the long and short of it is, Carl gives Rick a reason to keep going, and with him gone, the show lost its reason. Secondly, AMC knew Andrew Lincoln wanted to leave. Hell, fans even knew at this time period. Andrew wanted to come back to England to spend more time with his family, so AMC knew they had a decision to make for season 9. But killing off Carl, someone who could have stepped up in Rick's absence, will always baffle me. In the comics, Carl eventually leads our group, coming full circle as a character, and with Andrew Lincoln being very vocal about leaving the show, it felt like the very obvious play here was to let Carl lead. However, Scott Gimple chose to kill him off, the very future of the franchise, the person that could have bridged that gap post Rick Grimes era. Now, how do we fix this mistake from AMC? Well, this is the easiest answer of the entire video. I don't have to intricately rewrite storylines or add hypothetical scenarios. Simply, just don't kill Carl Grimes. That is it. The decline in viewers towards the end of Season 7 and Season 8 was just so avoidable. It was a time where maybe viewer fatigue was starting to set in, but to combat that, give us some stuff that made the early seasons so special, and I'm mainly referring to the character dynamics that made the show so famous. I mean, in the actual show, we should have at least seen a Daryl and Maggie conflict after the punch that got Glenn killed. Season 7 was a tonal mess, and Season 8 shares most of those flaws. Carl's sudden realisation for a better world comes out of literally nowhere, his death is awful as I've explained, and the second half of the season is actually pretty solid, but it's playing catch up from such a subpar start to it. All they had to do was show us some more character dynamics, tone down the fragmented storytelling, and don't kill off Carl Grimes. It was that simple. And it's a massive shame because the Season 8 finale titled Wrath is so beautiful, but the events of Season 8 themselves massively overshadow it. So, the main show had started to fall into disarray with Carl Grimes' death, but at least AMC still had Fear the Walking Dead, right? After Carl Grimes' death, AMC had some thinking to do. Scott Gimple had already made a decision that cost them 30% of their viewers, so they of course fired him. Oh, hang on, it says here they didn't fire him, they in fact promoted him. Yes, he became head screenwriter for the entire Walking Dead universe, and his first decision in charge, well, it was to fire Dave Erickson, the head of Fear the Walking Dead. Now, Dave Erickson had already written a 7-season-long plan for Fear that would slowly see Madison Clark morph into a villain, showing us how a normal person can get caught up and consumed by the apocalypse, and this would have ended in the final showdown between Nick Clark and his own mother, which I'm sure many of us would have loved to have seen. However, after Erickson's firing, these plans changed, pretty drastically. As I stated earlier, Fear had carved out an incredibly loyal fanbase, with around 4 million people tuning in every week to watch the show, and the show's ratings had started to climb, but that would all change in 2018. After Scott Gimple took over, actors Frank Delane and Kim Dickens no longer wanted to stay in the show, because they weren't fans of the direction Scott Gimple was taking it. And although Kim Dickens would return for Season 8, they eventually decided to kill off Frank Delane's character of Nick Clark, which we will get into in a bit. But essentially, Gimple decided to move over Morgan Jones from the main show in an attempt to improve the already respectable viewing figures. And to be fair to Scott Gimple, it did work. For 2 episodes, and then viewership absolutely plummeted to the lowest point it's ever been. And I mean, by the end of Season 4 of Fear the Walking Dead, they were bringing in less than 2 million viewers a week, which means over 50% of Fear the Walking Dead's fanbase had now gone. But why was this? Well, put very simply, it was Gimple's decision to move Morgan Jones over from the main show. However, as soon as he did this, Morgan didn't become part of the group, he became the whole show. It was all about him now, and it transformed the show into something completely different. We'd spent 3 seasons getting to know the Clark family and their story, and it was nowhere near finished, as you can very clearly tell by the end of Season 3. There are just so many loose ends. It's to the point where when you finish Season 3 and click onto the first episode of Season 4, you genuinely think you've clicked on the wrong show or missed an entire season out. But more importantly, Fear had now lost its originality. It had transformed into the main show with weaker characters and less compelling storylines. Nick, Madison and Daniel Salazar were gone, Alicia and Strand now take a back seat, and we watched the series become the Morgan Jones show. Now this was a massive blow for the loyal fanbase, one that was met with uproar. The decision made to try and boost ratings meant most of the loyal fanbase just flat out left because it was no longer the same show they fell in love with, and the new people who arrived to watch Morgan Jones very quickly realised it was just a worse version of the main show and it had no unique selling points. Dave Erickson had anticipated these changes, and he did try to save characters, I guess inadvertently, by killing them off. I mean, take Troy Otto for example. He knew the complex nature of this character would never thrive in this new era of Fear the Walking Dead, so he attempted to kill him off, until Scott Gimple decided to miraculously resurrect him again to make a return for Season 8. But we'll get on to the returns of Troy Otto and Madison Clark. Okay, let's now focus on what the death of Nick Clark actually did to Fear. Again, I have a whole video on why killing Nick Clark was the worst decision Fear the Walking Dead could have ever made on my channel, but essentially Nick was the heart and soul of Fear the Walking Dead. He was the fan favourite, and from the very first episode, Nick wasn't just a protagonist, he was the emotional core of Fear. As a recovering drug addict who saw the world collapse whilst already living on the fringes of society, Nick offered us a rare and layered perspective on the apocalypse, one we'd never seen before, and his journey from addict to survivor was one of the most compelling in the entire Walking Dead universe. Now, this show had always been about family. Madison, Nick and Alicia form the emotional centre of the series, and with Travis already dead, Nick now killed off, Madison leaving the show and Alicia taking a back seat, the family story was in complete ruins. And after Nick's death, Fear lost its most unique character, and it never found a true replacement. Add to this, Alicia was never given the writing she deserved, and new characters like Morgan, June and Al struggled to connect with fans, meant the viewership started to drop to some pretty bleak numbers. Season 4, after Nick's death in episode 3, titled Good Out Here, started to fall, and the show would average just over 2 million viewers for the rest of Season 4. But this alarming downward trend would continue season after season. Season 5 would only bring in 1.5 million viewers. Season 6, even though it was a massive step up in quality, saw only a 1.2 million viewer average, and Season 7 was now firmly under a million, sitting at 800,000 viewers per episode. And last, and very much least, Season 8 finished the show for good with an abysmal 400,000 viewers. Meaning in the span of just 5 years, Fear the Walking Dead had lost over 90% of its audience. The worst part is, for Season 8, AMC attempted to bring back old characters in a desperate ploy to boost ratings, but the damage had already been done. Madison and Troy were brought back to try and resurrect the series, but it made little difference to the numbers. AMC had run Fear the Walking Dead into the ground, and there was nothing that could save this show. And this all stemmed from Carl's death in the main show. This one decision killed its partner show and left fans angry from the main one. Look, the simple fix for this whole situation is to leave Fear the Walking Dead alone. Don't kill Nick Clark, keep Dave Erickson on, play out its original plan, and yeah, if you want to bring over some characters from the main show, that's fine, but just don't have them hog the limelight and take over the narrative from the already established characters. Fear the Walking Dead was looking like a great first step into creating a wider universe for this media franchise. However, the once promising concept was now in tatters. The year is now 2018, and The Walking Dead main show releases its 9th season, and after the previous 2 seasons had been picked apart by critics and left fans angry with writing decisions, AMC had some serious making up to do. And they kicked things off making a very good decision appointing Angela Kang as showrunner. Now, the elephant in the room was always going to be Andrew Lincoln's departure and how the show was going to deal with it. However, season 9 manages to give a fitting send-off to one of the most iconic characters ever written, and his last episode in season 9 is not only raved about by critics, but also one of the most beautiful episodes in the entire series. They handled Rick's absence just about as well as any show could do, losing its main character, and the introduction of the Whisperers was a much needed new storyline. Now, it wasn't all perfect. Some of the newer characters introduced here did feel a bit shoehorned in, but in general the season was a massive step up from the previous two. In terms of viewership, numbers stayed consistent with around 7 million tuning in each episode. However, that doesn't tell the full story. There was a huge increase in critic scores for season 9 and a generally good reception from fans. The Whisperers brought back some of that early horror feel that the show had been lacking as of late, and some truly shocking and amazing moments happened. Season 9 was a creative revival that breathed new life into a show that many had started to give up on, and Season 9 did manage to reinvigorate the franchise and win back a significant portion of its own fan base. But the question now is, would AMC be able to keep this momentum rolling? Around the time of season 10 of the main show, AMC decided to give this whole spin-off malarkey another shot, and they announced they would be releasing another show titled World Beyond that would premiere on October 4th, 2020. Now, many people were initially excited. This show would be targeted at a younger audience and aim to answer more questions surrounding the virus itself. What could possibly go wrong? Well, it actually turns out quite a lot. The show had ambition, I'll give it that, but that was about all it had going for it. Critics absolutely picked this show to pieces, and the fan reception wasn't much better. Although nearly 3 million people would tune in to the World Beyond season premiere, by the finale just 10 episodes later, that number would already be down to 600,000, and the second season performed even worse than the first, grabbing an average viewing of less than 500,000 an episode. So this ultimately was another swing and a miss from AMC. But what was actually wrong with this spin-off show? Because it was by all means the right time to release another spin-off. Fresh from the upsurge in reception from season 9, I agree AMC were right to do this, but it was the decision to write this like a teen drama that will always baffle me. The pacing was incredibly slow, and the characters weren't interesting enough to have whole episodes dedicated to just them talking. But the biggest problem with World Beyond was its connection to the CRM, the mysterious organisation hinted at in The Walking Dead and Fear. This organisation was central to Rick Grimes' disappearance, and whilst this show did have its moments like Dr. Bennett's research, many hoped the show would lay major groundworks for Rick's return, but it only offered minimal payoff and asked more questions than it gave answers. Overall, this show was yet another missed opportunity for AMC, and had the series been good, by all means it could have reignited the Walking Dead universe. I mean, the hype was obviously there due to the sheer amount of people that tuned in for the season opener, but ultimately World Beyond was a well-intentioned experiment that didn't quite pan out. But how would AMC actually fix this? Well, for starters, the first half of season 1 is far too slow and lacked any real urgency. I would open with a major stakes moment, like the CRM raiding their community, forcing the kids to flee. I mean, the CRM was the main draw of this show, so make them the main focus a lot sooner. Integrating the CRM directly into the narrative from the start would make this show so much more entertaining, and also improve the writing of the characters themselves and stop trying to make a teen drama. Had they done this, World Beyond could have been a very solid spin-off. However, let's get back onto the main show. Season 10 of The Walking Dead was released in late 2019, but once again, due to drawn out storylines and a massive 22 episode count that was stuffed with filler episodes, numbers once again started to dwindle, and Season 10 averaged 5 million viewers worldwide per episode, which was once again less than the previous season. Now, this had become a trend for the last few years, and the momentum AMC had seemingly started building up came screeching to a halt. Now, the problem with Season 10 is the Whisperer storyline much like the Saviour one, is drawn out for far too long and people just flat out got bored. Mix this in with production problems due to a certain global pandemic I can't mention in this video, and you get what is arguably the most mixed bag in the entire series. Some episodes, like Here's Negan, A Certain Doom and Walk With Us, received glowing reviews from both critics and audience members, whilst others, such as Splinter and Diverged, received the two lowest critics and audience scores in the history of the Walking Dead main show. And it still felt like Carl's death all those years ago still very much haunted this show. And the last season of the main show was announced for 2021. Now personally, I won't lie to you all, I'm not the biggest fan of season 11. I still enjoyed it, but to me it doesn't really feel like The Walking Dead at all. But although numbers did drop to around 2.5 million viewers, critics and audience members in general seem to be happy. But let's just take a moment to look back at the figures in 2015. The Walking Dead was pulling in 15 million viewers an episode. However, fast forward just 6 measly years, and only 15% of that audience now remained. So why did the show lose this many viewers? I guess besides the copious amounts of mistakes AMC made, it was just flat out viewer fatigue. Season 11 could have genuinely been the best season of television ever created, and I would still guarantee it wouldn't pull in numbers anywhere near to 15 million. By 2021, we had over 19 seasons of The Walking Dead content, and it had been well over a decade since Days Gone By had released. Fans had just had enough. Mix in with the fact cable TV was starting to die as viewership amongst every show as a whole had started to fall, as people were now choosing to stream and binge shows on apps such as Netflix and Disney+, and you get the perfect storm for a fall off in viewership. In truth, there isn't much AMC could have done, as the damage was so severe from earlier seasons. As for my personal opinion, I would have shortened both seasons 10 and 11 to 16 episodes, removed the filler episodes, and I would have had a well-established, imposing villain for the final season rather than the Commonwealth, who I didn't find that interesting. But to conclude, the fall off in viewership across the main show and spin-offs was a mix of things, mistakes and scenarios AMC could never control. I mean, take the global pandemic or the death of cable TV, or even actors wanting to leave the show. I mean, in Fear the Walking Dead you had Cliff Curtis, Frank Delane and Kim Dickens, all central figures, request to leave, and then in the main show you had Andrew Lincoln, Denai Guerrera and many more. The fact this show was even able to, and is still going to this day, is a testament to the fan base it's managed to create for itself. And this cinematic universe may be on its way out, as I'll explore the spin-off since the show's conclusion after this very section, but there was a time period where The Walking Dead was the biggest show ever, and it then released the biggest spin-off show in TV history, and Fear the Walking Dead held that title for 7 long years until House of the Dragon released in 2022. So there really was a time where this franchise looked poised to dominate for decades to come. So what does the future hold for this sleeping giant, and will this show ever return to its former glory? After the main show's conclusion in 2022, we get Dead City, Tales of the Walking Dead, The Daryl Dixon Show, and The Ones Who Live. Now, albeit every single one of these is a huge step up in quality from the later seasons of Fear the Walking Dead and World Beyond. However, they are by no means must-watch TV, except maybe The Ones Who Live. However, an extremely rushed final act sees the show plummet in ratings towards the end. Quite frankly, the glaring problem with all of these spin-offs, except Tales of the Walking Dead, which we'll get onto in a minute, is that they all involve legacy characters like Daryl, Negan, Rick and Maggie, who yes are fan favourites, but they are now essentially unkillable, and viewers know this. And it's this very concept that undermines the whole concept that made The Walking Dead so appealing in the first place. It's no longer a world where no one is truly safe. With predetermined endings and invincible leads, the stakes feel manufactured and low with a lot of these spin-offs. Now, I'd quickly like to talk about Tales of the Walking Dead because I think the show as a concept is fascinating and I would love to see AMC bring it back for a second season, just with some characters to tie into the main show. Now, of course, I'm not asking for a Rick Grimes prequel episode because Andrew Lincoln would probably never agree to that, but maybe show Dave and Tony's journey that led them into the bar that day in season 2 and end the episode just before they encounter Rick, Herschel and Glenn. or give us an episode visiting the fall of the Atlanta prison and how Axel and the others ended up in the canteen that day. Just little nostalgic episodes like this, I think could pull in a large number of viewers. Now, if you want some more of these ideas, both my friends Jerry and Ticewell have made videos on them that I also feature in, talking about possible ideas for a season 2 of Tales, so I highly recommend you check them out. But I definitely think there is so much that could be explored in a season 2 of Tales. As for the other spin-offs, just a quick note, I haven't seen Dead City, so I won't be going into that here, but there are some glaring problems. The Ones Who Live, whilst having an all-star cast, amazing visuals, and a brilliant story concept, just can't be told in that 6 short episodes, causing it to feel like a rushed narrative and incredibly far-fetched, like Rick and Michonne literally defeat an army of thousands of CRM soldiers in the space of like 10 minutes, and it's a storyline that needed at least another season dedicated to it. And the show gives us a lackluster end to the CRM, an organisation that have been teased for years. And Daryl Dixon as a show is fine. I mean, it's got Daryl and Carol in it, which alone make it watchable, but the plot is so far-fetched again, it makes it hard to take it that seriously. Along with this, the timelines have started to become extremely confusing and fans are just losing interest. So with that being said, let's get into my ideas for how to get the Walking Dead universe back on track. Now, I think the biggest thing that holds The Walking Dead back in current day is its reputation of a decline in quality the further into the series you go, along with, obviously, viewer fatigue. So, to combat this, I'd wrap up the story of all our beloved characters. No matter how hard it may be to say goodbye to them all, next year will be 16 years since we first got introduced to our survivors, and I do think the time has come for a goodbye. Now, when would I have this happen? Well, preferably as soon as possible. However, I know the Daryl Dixon show has been renewed for seasons 3 and 4, and there's rumours of a Dead City 3. But for argument's sake, let's say Daryl and Carol make it home at the end of season 4 and they see Rick, Michonne, Maggie, Negan, Judith, Gabriel, everyone. The whole gang is there, reunited. And we get one final heartfelt episode where some of the best characters in fiction all say goodbye for the last time. Now, I'm sure AMC could get all the actors to agree on a one-off finale episode to wrap up The Walking Dead, and I actually think this would be good for the show's legacy, as bowing out on a high note with a concrete ending just feels like the right way to end one of the most iconic series ever created. And I think in years to come, if the show does wrap up, fans will look upon it more fondly than maybe most people do now. But now, you may be wondering, where does the show go from here if I'm ending it, essentially? Well, firstly, I think a good start would be a Tales Season 2, that would be packed with nostalgic episodes for the OG fans to indulge in. I mean, take us back to some of the most iconic locations in the show, or flesh out some of the characters we never really learnt about. If I was AMC, I would then immediately get an animated series made, much like Invincible, where we would see the Walking Dead comics brought to life. I think the fact the show and the comics are fairly different in storylines mean people would still definitely tune into them, and as we all know with the rise of animation, it would be a great time to capitalise on this. And finally, I would start again, in a different location with new characters and a different cast, much like the main show and Fear did all those years ago. Give us that raw, brutal survival from the very start that we all fell in love with. New dynamics, a new setting with a whole new creative team behind it is what, in my opinion, the franchise is calling out for. I mean, it's obvious, people still want to see zombies on their screens. I mean, take the success of The Last of Us as proof. A well-written new story, maybe set in Asia, would be awesome. Like, let me give you a rough example that I thought of in literally less than 5 minutes. We see a group of American students go on a university trip to Tokyo. Then we watch the biggest city on the planet descend into chaos as our characters try to survive the early days of the outbreak, have them deal with internal struggles, language barriers, and of course zombies. In my opinion, that has the potential to reignite the Walking Dead universe, and if this show was successful, you could branch out from it, much like Fear did to caveat the main show. Look, whether you like my idea or not, I think starting again from the very beginning with a whole new group and a new setting is really the only way this franchise can be saved in terms of building a cohesive universe. Look, the demand for zombies is still there. In fact, I don't think it will ever die. The thing is with The Walking Dead, it's just viewer fatigue. With the current characters involved with it, we have known them for decades. And I think it might be time for AMC to start again. But let me know what you guys think down below in the comments. Do you agree or disagree with how I would save the Walking Dead universe? And with that being said, thank you all so much for watching. I know today's been a bit of a longer video, so thank you all for watching, but I've put a lot of work into this one, so I would really appreciate it if you like and subscribe if you enjoyed it. Now, we are closing in on 15,000 subscribers, so thank you all so much for the support recently. And with that being said, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.